Hello there, Algebra students. This is Mr. Kashi speaking. This video we're going to be going through, we're going to have two videos in 10.3. This is the first one on how to solve quadratic equations. So now we're not just graphing the parabola, but we're actually finding out a solution to them. And there's a couple of different things that you need to know about parabolas that we're going to go through here to find their solutions. But just I've added this slide in from past years. We didn't have this slide, but here at just solving quadratic equations, how you do it is just finding the x-intercepts of a parabola. So that's the main definition of what you're doing. But if you were to have a parabola that looks like this, and you were to ask to solve it, well, you're just finding exactly where the parabola crosses the x-axis, which are your x-intercepts. This simple definition of how to solve quadratic equations seemed to hit home with a lot of students last year, so I decided to add it in. Moving on to our next slide here. The first way of doing this would be to solve this graphically. So if we had x squared minus 4, I'm going to do that in red, we'd have a vertex right here, and we would have a parabola that looks like this. That's in red. And this particular parabola has two solutions, as you can see, because it crosses the x-axis in two different spots. Okay, crosses x-axis in two different spots. Okay, so that's a parabola that has a vertex below the x-axis and it's pointing up. Okay, if we were just to talk about our parent function, we'll do that in green. Our vertex would be right there at the origin, and we'd have a parabola that looks like this. Okay, and this is a parabola that has one solution. And that's where the vertex is on the x-axis. Okay. So really, it only touches the x-axis in one spot. But if it only touches it in one spot for a parabola, that's going to have to be the vertex. So vertex is on x-axis. Okay. And then finally, we're going to do the last one, y equals x squared plus 4. So our vertex is at 4 here. And we have the parabola that looks like this. Oh, terrible drawing. Parabola would be at 4 right here. And that would be what we would call no solution. And that does not cross x-axis. So as you can see, when we talk about solving for quadratic equations, the shape of a quadratic equation would be a parabola. We're talking about how many solutions do we have. In one instance, like the red graph here, you could have two solutions. And with the green parabola, we only had one solution. And for the blue parabola, we have no solutions. And so that's the first thing that you find out when you're solving quadratic equations. How many solutions are we going to have? One, two, or none. So it becomes very, very handy to make sure that we know how to find these critical points. Okay, so we have x-intercepts, y-intercepts, and the vertex. So I know this is kind of a review from what we've done in the past, but we're going to have a little bit different notes. So x-intercepts, okay, they would be right here. So I'm going to draw some arrows there. Those are our x-intercepts. And that tells us how many solutions. Okay, and if you want to find what the x-intercepts are, you plug in 0 for y. Okay, and if you plug in 0 for y and complete the, solving it that way, you will find your x-intercepts, which is basically our main point. Another critical point that you're going to want to know is the y-intercept. So that's right there. Okay, and that is where the graph crosses the y-axis. And you don't need it to solve quadratic equations, but you will need it to solve some of the word problems that we do later on in the chapter. How you find the y-intercept is you plug in 0. You plug in 0 for x. Okay, so just to review quickly, x-intercept, you want to plug in 0 for y. Y-intercept, you want to plug in 0 for x. And then finally, we have the vertex. And that'll be the maximum or minimum of any parabola. But just to review how we find the vertex, you start off by finding your opposite of b over 2a, and that's with standard form, which we're going to be practicing the most. So just a review of how to get started on finding the vertex. So you have one solution, two solutions, or no solutions, and then you have your x-intercepts, your y-intercepts, and your vertex. Then I want to move on to a couple of examples here, just dealing with the square root. So if we had equations that look like this, this seems pretty straightforward, but I do want to caution you that it's not as easy as it looks. So here we have x squared equals 36. To solve that, you'd take the square root of both sides, and a lot of people put 6 there for x, when really, if you think about it, x squared equals 36. What number could I plug in for x to make this true? I could do 6, right? 6 squared is 36, but I could also do negative 6 squared is 36. So there's actually two answers for that. We have two answers. When we take the square root of both sides, we have two answers. We have the positive and the negative. So this is 6 and negative 6. So if you just remember that, when you take the square root of both sides, you have the positive and the negative form of each number. So here we take the square root of both sides. This wouldn't just be positive 12, but we have a negative 12 as well. Okay. And then if you do have a calculator handy, this is an important question to do this. I have y squared equals negative 81. So I need a number, multiply by itself, and get a negative 81. Well, there's no way of doing that. We take, if we get a negative number here, one of the y's has to be negative and the other y has to be a positive, but they can't be that because they have to be the same number. And if you were to take the square root of negative 81 in your calculator, sure enough, you'd get an error. So in this case, we would say that this is no solution. All right, so we have a couple of examples dealing with the square roots. And we're going to have more examples on another video for you.